Look, everyone keeps asking me what happened with Julian. And honestly, I'm sick of it. I'm sick of explaining myself to people who weren't there, who couldn't possibly understand. My name is Alara. I'm 28 now. But this story, this whole mess, it started when I was 23. And it's so much more complicated than anyone wants to believe. It's not a simple story of a good guy and a bad guy. It's a story about me, and the biggest mistake of my life. I met Julian through our mutual friend Maya. It was at some house party, one of those nights where the music is too loud and everyone's trying a little too hard. But then there was him. He wasn't loud, he wasn't trying, he just was. He seemed sweet enough, grounded. And he was really into physical touch, which I appreciated. That's my love language, you know? A hand on my back, his arm around my shoulders, it felt like home. And for a while, it was. The first few months were a blur of effort. His effort. He was always doing these nice things. Concerts for bands I'd mentioned offhand weeks before. Festivals on the coast. Movies I wanted to see. He even planned this 5-day beach vacation that was. Actually, it was pretty fun. We built sandcastles like we were 10 years old, and he held my hand under the stars and told me he'd never felt like this before. Don't get me wrong, it was all nice. It was perfect. But isn't that what boyfriends are supposed to do? If you're dating someone, you should want to make them happy. You should want to show them a good time. It felt less like a grand romance and more like he was just checking the boxes. Julian was one of those guys. The kind whose mom clearly raised him to be a gentleman. Super polite. Almost painfully respectful. Always opening doors for me, for strangers, for anyone. Insisting on paying for every single thing. Brushing off my attempts to split the bill like it was an insult. He remembered the most random, insignificant details about things I'd said in passing. The name of my childhood dog. The fact that I hated cilantro. The story behind a tiny scar on my knee. He'd text me, "Good morning, beautiful," every single day. Without fail. He was constantly checking in, asking how I was feeling, what was on my mind. He would drop whatever he was doing if I said I needed something. Anything. It sounds sweet when I put it like that, doesn't it? The perfect boyfriend. But honestly, it started feeling like a lot. Like pressure. A constant, low-grade pressure to be as perfect and grateful as he was perfect and giving. And if I'm being truly honest, just between us, I was getting kind of bored. Julian was so predictable. I could map out our entire weekend by Tuesday. Friday night would be movies at his place, probably some indie film I'd said I was interested in. Saturday brunch at the Daily Grind, that little cafe with the good avocado toast. Sunday afternoon, a walk through Green Lake Park. He had this whole routine down. This comfortable, safe, little life built for two. And he never, ever wanted to shake things up. When I'd suggest something spontaneous, like a last-minute road trip, or going to some underground club I'd heard about, he'd hesitate. He'd worry about the money. Or the timing. Or whether it was practical. Everything had to be planned and safe and responsible. My friends didn't see it. They only saw the surface. Maya would constantly tell me how lucky I was. They'd go on and on about what a catch Julian was, how he treated me like a queen. But they didn't see the day-to-day. They didn't feel the gentle, suffocating weight of all that predictability. Sure, he was stable. He was reliable. But where was the excitement? Where was that butterflies in your stomach feeling? That heart-pounding uncertainty? I was 23. I should be having adventures. Feeling that rush of new experiences. Not settling into some quiet, domestic routine like we were already planning our retirement. I started noticing other guys more when we'd go out. Guys who seemed confident in a different way. A little dangerous. A little mysterious. Guys who didn't feel the need to tell me every single detail about their day at work. Julian would give me a play-by-play of his lunch break. Who he ate with, what they talked about. And I'd just be sitting there, nodding, thinking to myself, There has to be more to life than this. Even his friends were nice, safe, just like him. They'd sit around playing video games and talking about software updates and work projects. When we'd hang out with them, I felt like I was aging 10 years in one night. I wanted to go to parties where I didn't know anyone. I wanted to meet artists and musicians and people who did crazy things. But Julian was always worried about getting home at a reasonable hour or not spending too much money on drinks. Here's the thing, though. The thing that made me feel so guilty. Julian really did treat me well. Maybe too well. He'd surprise me with my favorite coffee from that place across town. He'd plan these elaborate date nights based on a throwaway comment I'd made. He'd buy me flowers for no reason at all. But it started to feel performative. Like he was following some playbook on how to be the perfect boyfriend instead of actually being spontaneous and romantic. It was thoughtfulness without the spark, and I started feeling guilty. So guilty for not being more grateful. Which, in a twisted way, just made me resent the whole situation even more. He was doing everything right according to everyone else, but it just wasn't working for me. Not anymore. I needed someone who could keep me guessing. Someone who would make me work a little for their attention instead of just being available 24/7. That's when I downloaded the dating apps. It wasn't because I was planning to cheat. Not really. I just wanted to see what else was out there. A little window shopping for a life I wasn't living. Julian didn't need to know. It was harmless. I was just looking. Just curious about what kind of options existed beyond my comfortable, predictable little world. The matches started coming in. And suddenly, I remembered what it felt like to have choices. There were guys who didn't text back immediately. Guys who had interesting, unconventional jobs and wild hobbies. Guys who seemed like they actually had full, exciting lives that didn't revolve around making their girlfriend happy. It was refreshing. It was thrilling to talk to people who weren't constantly asking about my feelings or what I wanted for dinner. And that's when I matched with Zane. Right from his pictures, I could tell he was different. He was everything Julian wasn't. He looked confident, but it was a different kind of confidence. It was an edge, a swagger. Tattoos snaked up his arms. In one picture, he was leaning against a motorcycle, a smirk on his face that seemed to say he knew things I didn't. He had some vague, exciting-sounding job in event production. It sounded way cooler than whatever Julian did in his office cubicle. When Zane messaged me, he was direct, flirty, funny, but he wasn't clingy or needy. We started chatting. And for the first time in months, I felt that spark. That jolt of excitement. Zane would take hours, sometimes a whole day, to text back. It should have annoyed me. With Julian, a 2-hour silence would have made me wonder if something was wrong, but with Zane, it just made me want his attention more. It made every reply feel like a reward. He'd make these slightly inappropriate jokes, these comments that walked the line, and they made me feel desirable in a way Julian's constant, gentle compliments never did. Julian's compliments felt like a given. Zane's felt earned. I kept telling myself it was just a harmless conversation. Just talking to someone new. A little ego boost. But honestly, I was already emotionally checking out of my relationship with Julian. I was already halfway out the door. I'd catch myself comparing everything. Julian would hold my hand, and I'd wonder what it felt like to ride on the back of Zane's motorcycle. Julian would talk about saving for a down payment, and I'd imagine Zane deciding to drive to another city on a whim. I had been dating Julian for 4 months when I finally agreed to meet Zane for coffee. Just coffee, nothing more. That's what I told myself. A simple, harmless coffee. But the second I saw him in person, I knew I was in trouble. He had this energy about him that Julian completely lacked. A restless, magnetic energy. He was confident, a little cocky, and he carried himself like he didn't care one bit whether I showed up or not, which, of course, made me want him to care. We ended up talking for hours. About music, about travel, about everything and nothing. And when he leaned across the table and suggested we go back to his place, I didn't even hesitate. Being with Zane, it was everything my relationship with Julian wasn't. There was this intensity, this raw passion, this feeling like anything could happen at any moment. Zane didn't constantly ask if I was okay or worry about my comfort level. He just took charge. And it was exactly what I thought I had been missing. That was the beginning of the end. I started meeting Zane whenever Julian was at work. It was disgustingly easy. Julian trusted me completely. He never questioned where I was going or who I was with. And you know what? That bothered me too. It was another check in the con column for him. Like, shouldn't you be a little concerned about losing me? Shouldn't you be a little jealous? His complete and total lack of jealousy made me feel like maybe I wasn't that important to him after all. It's twisted, I know. But it's how I felt. Everything with Zane felt dangerous and thrilling. He wouldn't always respond to my texts, which made me obsess over my phone, waiting for that little buzz. When we were together, he'd mention other women, or talk about his exes in a way that made me feel like I was in a competition. It should have been a massive red flag, a whole parade of them, but it just made me want to win him over even more. Meanwhile, Julian was still being his perfect, predictable self. Still bringing me coffee. Still planning thoughtful dates. Still being supportive about everything in my life. But now, it all felt suffocating. Unbearable. I'd sit through dinner with him at some nice restaurant he'd picked out, my mind a million miles away. I'd be thinking about Zane, wondering when I'd see him next. I'd find myself pulling away when Julian tried to hold my hand. So I started picking fights. Over stupid, insignificant things. He'd suggest a restaurant, and I'd complain it was boring. He'd want to stay in for a quiet night, and I'd accuse him of being antisocial. He'd talk about our future plans, maybe a trip next year, and I'd get irritated, telling him he was being presumptuous. Looking back, it's so clear. I was creating distance. I was trying to make him the bad guy to justify what I was doing behind his back. The lying got easier every single time. I'm going out with Maya and the girls. I have to work late tonight, my phone died, excuses flowed out of me, and Julian, he never questioned me. He never seemed suspicious, which, again, in my warped 2-3-year-old mind, felt like he just didn't care enough to pay attention. After 2 months of this double life, Julian started pushing for answers. He could feel me slipping away. He knew something was wrong. He wanted to have these deep, serious conversations about us and our relationship. And I'd just get frustrated. I'd get angry that he was being so needy and insecure. I just need some space, I'd snap. But he kept suffocating me with his concern. That's when I realized I had to choose. Zane was starting to make comments. Why are you even with that boring boyfriend? If you're not happy, just break up with him. The way he said it, it made it sound so obvious. So simple. So, I made my decision. I was choosing excitement over security. Passion over stability. I was 23 years old. I deserved to be with someone who made me feel alive, not someone who was just safe. Not someone who was perfect on paper. The night it ended, Julian had cornered me. He said we needed to talk, for real this time. I could have lied again. I could have made up another excuse. But I was just tired. Tired of pretending. So I told him. Everything. I told him I'd been seeing someone else. For 2 months. That I wasn't happy. That I needed something different. Something more than what he could give me. Julian just sat there on the edge of his perfectly made bed. His face just crumbling. He looked shocked. Utterly blindsided. I explained about Zane, about how we'd been hooking up, about the excitement I felt. And instead of getting angry, instead of yelling or fighting for me, he just asked, why? His voice was so quiet. What did I do wrong? And in that moment, I knew for sure I was making the right choice. A real man would have shown some fire, some passion, some kind of fight. He would have been angry that another man had been with his woman. But Julian, he just sat there looking defeated, broken, asking what he could do to change my mind. I tried to explain. I need someone with more edge, I said. Someone exciting, who isn't so predictable. Julian just looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. And that one look proved how wrong we were for each other. He didn't get it. He would never get it. He didn't yell. He didn't fight. He didn't show any real, raw emotion. And honestly, it was disappointing. I wanted him to prove that losing me actually mattered, that it would destroy him. Instead, he just processed what I told him like it was a business problem. He asked logical, calm questions about where we went wrong. The next morning, I sent a text. Just to check on him. A small part of me felt bad. But the message wouldn't go through. A single check mark. He had blocked me. On everything. Social media. Phone. Even Venmo. It seemed like such an overreaction. So dramatic. Cutting me off completely instead of handling things like a mature adult. That's what I told myself anyway. It was easier than admitting how much it stung. I moved in with Zane pretty quickly after that. His place was nothing like Julian's pristine, organized apartment. There were clothes everywhere, empty beer bottles on the counter, motorcycle parts scattered on the living room floor, but it felt real, authentic. It didn't feel like some sterile showroom. Living with Zane was everything I thought I wanted. Every day was unpredictable. Exciting. Sometimes he'd come home with last-minute concert tickets. Other times we'd just hop on his motorcycle and drive to another city just because he felt like it. He didn't plan everything to death like Julian did. He just lived in the moment, and I was living in it with him. Sure, there were adjustments. Zane wasn't as financially stable as Julian. Not even close. I ended up covering more of the bills, more of the groceries, more expenses than I was used to. But it felt more equal, somehow. Better than Julian always insisting on paying for everything, which in hindsight now seemed controlling. Zane also wasn't as communicative. He didn't text constantly. He didn't always want to know how I was feeling. At first, I missed the constant attention. But then, I told myself it was probably healthier. Julian had been so clingy, so needy, always requiring reassurance. This was independence. About 3 months after I left Julian, I was at a coffee shop with Zane. He was on his phone, barely paying attention to me. And I spotted Julian across the room. My heart did this weird flutter. It caught me completely off guard. He looked good. Really good. He had a different haircut, shorter on the sides. He looked like he'd been working out. He held himself differently. More confident than I remembered. I gave a little wave. Just to be friendly, to be the bigger person. He looked right at me, no expression, and then he deliberately, slowly, looked away. As if I were a stranger. As if I were nothing. It stung. More than I expected. I mean, we could at least acknowledge each other like adults, right? The whole time we were there, Zane was scrolling through his phone, ignoring me, while I kept glancing over at Julian. He was meeting with someone, laughing, looking completely at ease. When he got up to leave, he walked right past our table without a single glance in my direction. Seeing Julian looking so put together, so confident and unbothered, it bothered me more than it should have. I think a part of me expected him to look heartbroken, or at least, affected by our breakup. But he seemed to be thriving. It made me wonder what he'd been doing with his time. But I pushed those thoughts away. I had made my choice. And I made it for good reasons. Julian had been boring. Predictable. Reliable, yes, but boring. Zane brought excitement to my life. Even if that excitement also brought chaos, uncertainty. And the chaos was getting worse. Living with Zane was getting more complicated. What had once seemed like passionate intensity was starting to feel like walking on eggshells. He'd get moody for no reason I could figure out. And when I'd ask what was wrong, he'd accuse me of being needy, of trying to control him. Then he started checking my phone when I wasn't around. At first, I tried to rationalize it. He just cared about me. He wanted to make sure I was safe. But it felt different from Julian's gentle concern. When Julian worried about me, it came from a place of love. When Zane got suspicious, it came from a place of possession. It felt controlling. He'd question me if I was even 10 minutes late getting home from work. If I mentioned a male coworker, Zane would spend hours grilling me about our relationship. I started editing my stories to avoid setting him off, which meant, basically, I started lying about harmless, everyday interactions. The fights were getting more intense too. Julian and we used to have calm discussions when we disagreed. We talked things through. But Zane would explode over the tiniest things. He'd yell. He threw a remote control against the wall once. He would twist my words and make me feel crazy for bringing up legitimate concerns. I found myself missing Julian's emotional stability more than I wanted to admit. With Julian, I'd always felt safe. Safe to express my feelings, safe to bring up problems, safe to just be. With Zane, I never knew if I'd get the charming, fun guy or the angry, suspicious stranger. Zane also didn't have his life together the way Julian had. He was constantly behind on bills. He couldn't seem to keep a steady job for more than a few months. And he expected me to cover more and more of our shared expenses. I started to feel this deep, burning resentment. I was basically supporting both of us. When I'd try to talk to him about our financial situation, he'd get defensive. He'd accuse me of being materialistic. "At least I'm not some boring office drone like your ex," he'd sneer. "You should appreciate that I'm a free spirit." But honestly, Julian's stability was starting to look incredibly appealing compared to the constant anxiety of wondering if we'd make rent each month. Julian had never made me worry. Not about money, not about having a roof over my head, not about my safety. Meanwhile, I'd hear things through Maya. Julian was doing really well. He'd gotten a big promotion. He was taking night classes to get some certification. He'd joined a gym. People said he seemed happier and more confident than they'd ever seen him. Part of me was glad for him, but a bigger, darker part of me was hurt. Hurt that he was thriving without me. That he had moved on so easily. The breaking point came one night after a party. Zane had been drinking. He accused me of flirting with some guy. I hadn't been. I was just talking to him. But Zane wouldn't let it go. When I tried to defend myself, to walk away from the argument, he grabbed my wrist. Hard. And he squeezed hard enough to leave bruises. He'd never gotten physical before. And in that moment, I was genuinely scared of him. He apologized profusely the next morning, said he'd been drunk and stressed, that it would never, ever happen again. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about how Julian, in our entire time together, even during our worst disagreements, even when I was telling him I'd cheated on him, had never once made me feel physically unsafe. 6 months after that incident, I finally left Zane. It wasn't easy. He'd isolated me from most of my friends. I had become financially entangled in supporting him, which was completely backwards, but somehow that's how it worked out. I moved back in with my parents. I was 24. It was humiliating. Having to explain why my exciting, passionate relationship had fallen apart in a haze of bills and bruises was embarrassing, especially since they'd always, very clearly, preferred Julian. But the hardest part was admitting it to myself, admitting how wrong I had been. About everything. I had given up a stable, loving, safe relationship for chaos, for someone who turned out to be controlling and abusive. I kept thinking about Julian, wondering how he was doing. I knew it was a bad idea, but I couldn't help myself. Through a friend's social media, I could see he was still thriving. He'd moved to a nicer apartment downtown. He seemed to have an active social life. He looked happy, healthy. I finally broke down and reached out to Maya. I asked if she'd heard anything about him. She hesitated. "Alara, I don't know if that's a good idea. Please, Maya, just tell me." She sighed. "He's dating someone new," she said softly. "A woman he met through work. She seems really nice. She treats him well." The news hit me like a physical blow, harder than I ever expected. Hearing that Julian had moved on, really moved on, made me realize what I'd actually lost. It wasn't just a boring relationship. It was someone who had loved me unconditionally. Someone who had treated me better than I deserved. And now he was giving all of that care, all of that devotion, to someone else. I started obsessing. I found her social media. I checked it constantly. She seemed perfect for him. Sweet, supportive, conventionally pretty. She posted pictures of the dinners he made for her. She wrote captions about how grateful she was. She appreciated his kindness instead of taking it for granted like I had. I began having these fantasies. I'd imagine reaching out to Julian, explaining everything that had happened with Zane. In my mind, he'd understand. He'd realize I'd learned from my mistakes. He'd feel protective, and he'd want to give us another chance. It was a stupid, foolish fantasy. 2 years after our breakup, I saw the announcement that destroyed me. Julian was engaged. The photos were professional. Him and this woman, his fiancée, laughing in a sun-drenched field. She looked genuinely, blissfully happy. The comments were a flood of congratulations, people talking about what a perfect couple they made. I stared at those engagement photos for hours. I read every single comment. Julian looked incredible, confident, successful, genuinely happy in a way I had never, ever seen him with me. His fiancée, she looked like everything I wasn't, grateful, supportive, the kind of woman who would appreciate what she had. The ring was beautiful, obviously expensive, which meant Julian was doing very, very well financially. I read that he'd gotten another promotion, that he was thriving in his career. Meanwhile, I was still struggling to get my life back together, still living with my parents, working a dead-end job. I felt this overwhelming, suffocating sense of loss. Seeing Julian so happy with someone else, it made me finally, truly realize what I had given up. I became a ghost, haunting the edges of their happy life. I checked both of their social media accounts constantly. They looked happy in every photo. Traveling. At dinner parties, casual pictures around the house. She'd post these gushing captions about how grateful she was to have found a man like him. Reading her posts made me angry. So angry. She was getting all the credit for appreciating Julian when I'd been with him first. She was acting like she'd discovered this amazing man when I had already done the relationship work. It was a selfish, ugly thought, but I couldn't stop it. Since Julian still had me blocked everywhere, I did something crazy. I created a fake account, and I sent him a long, long message. I poured everything out. I explained how wrong I'd been about Zane, how much I'd come to appreciate Julian's qualities, his stability, his kindness, how much I regretted throwing away what we had. I told him about how badly Zane had treated me, about the bruises, thinking maybe that would make him feel protective of me again. I explained that I'd been young and stupid, that I'd learned from my mistakes, that I was finally ready to be the girlfriend he deserved. I told him I still loved him, but Julian never responded. I waited for weeks, checking the fake account constantly. Nothing. He probably deleted it without even reading it. Or maybe his fiancée saw it first and made him block that account too. The wedding was approaching. I was running out of options. I was running out of time. I found out the when and where through social media. I knew it was insane. I knew it was a terrible idea. But I decided to go. Not to crash it, just to try and talk to him. Before the ceremony. One last time. When I got to the venue, there was security. I couldn't get close without an invitation, so I just watched. From across the street. I watched as the guests arrived, all dressed up, looking happy and excited. I felt like an outsider looking through a window at the life I could have had. Then I saw him arrive. He looked incredible in his tuxedo. Confident, handsome, genuinely joyful. And his bride, she was beautiful, glowing. Surrounded by friends and family who clearly adored her. They looked like they belonged together, in a way Eric and I never had. Standing there watching Julian's wedding from a distance, I finally realized. It was over. I had lost him. Forever. He had found someone who appreciated him, someone who made him happy in ways I never could. 6 months after Eric's wedding, I was still struggling. I tried dating, but I couldn't stop comparing everyone to Julian and finding them lacking. None of them had his kindness, his reliability, his genuine, unconditional care. My friends were tired of hearing about it. "Alara, you need to move on," they'd say. But they didn't understand. They didn't understand what I'd lost. A year after his wedding, I saw an announcement that made my stomach drop to the floor. Eric's wife was pregnant. They posted a photo of them holding up a tiny pair of shoes, both of them just glowing with excitement about starting a family. This felt final. This was the final proof that he was never, ever coming back. He wasn't just married anymore. He was building a family, a whole life. With someone else? I made one last pathetic attempt. I wrote him a real letter. A paper letter. I told him how sorry I was, how much I'd grown, how happy I was for him that he'd found a love that he deserved. I mailed it to his house. But he never responded to that either. 3 months later, I saw the birth announcement. Eric and his wife had a healthy baby boy. The pictures showed them looking exhausted, but blissfully, deliriously happy. Eric was a father now, building this beautiful life with his family. A life I wasn't part of at all. I was just some girl from his past, a mistake he'd rather forget. I tried moving to Houston to start over. I thought maybe the distance would help me forget. But even here, miles and years away, I can't escape him. Now I'm 28. And I realize this is my life. I am the girl who had true love and threw it all away for a cheap thrill that turned out to be garbage. Eric is never coming back. And honestly, why should he? Everyone tells me I need to move on, that obsessing over him is unhealthy. But they don't get it. Eric wasn't just some ex-boyfriend. He was the person who showed me what real, unconditional love looked like, and I spat in his face. I've tried dating other people. They all fall short. They're either boring, like I used to think Eric was, or they're exciting like Zayn, but just as unreliable and selfish. Sometimes I wonder if I've idealized Eric in my memory, if I've built him up into something he wasn't. But then I remember specific moments. The way he'd bring me coffee, exactly how I liked it, without me ever having to ask. The way he would listen, really listen, to me vent about work for an hour. The way I felt so completely, utterly safe with him. And I know, it was real. The therapists keep asking what I learned from all this. And I tell them the same thing. I learned not to take good people for granted. I learned that the grass isn't always greener. But that knowledge doesn't help me now. Because Eric is gone. And I can't apply that lesson to him anymore. Now, I'm alone in Houston. A place where nobody knows about Julian. A place where I can pretend to be someone who just hasn't found the right person yet. But the truth is, I did find the right person, and I chose someone else because I thought I deserved more. I thought I deserved better. The worst part, the absolute worst part, is that Julian probably doesn't think about me at all anymore. Why would he? He's busy with his wife and his kid. He's living this full, happy life that has absolutely no room for me in it. Meanwhile, I think about him constantly. People ask me what I want in a relationship now, and the answer is always the same. It's him. I want Julian. I want a do-over. A chance to go back to being 23 and be smart enough to recognize what I have. But that's never going to happen. Some mistakes, you just don't get to undo. So this is my life, alone at 28. Comparing everyone to a man I lost years ago, knowing, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that I had my shot at true happiness, and I blew it. Julian is living his best life with someone who deserves him, and I'm just here, dealing with the consequences of thinking I could do better. Maybe some people only get one chance at real love, and maybe mine is over. Maybe this is just what my life looks like now, always wondering what might have been. Always knowing that the best thing that ever happened to me is something I chose to walk away from. The funny thing is, if someone asked me for advice, I'd tell them, if you're dating a good man, a kind man, a reliable man. Appreciate him. Appreciate what you have. Don't make my mistake. Don't throw away something real for something that just looks more exciting on the surface. But nobody asks me for relationship advice anymore. Everyone knows I'm the cautionary tale. I'm the girl who had everything and lost it all because I didn't know what I had until it was gone. That's my story. That's how I went from being loved by the best man I'll ever know to being alone and bitter. Still missing someone who probably doesn't even remember my middle name.